They laughed in my face for 5 years straight, calling me the disgrace of the Rutherford legacy. But tonight, in their own gold-plated dining room, I'm about to reveal the biggest secret of my life. I just bought the empire they used to crush me beneath their heels. My name is Olivia Rutherford, and this is the story of how I turned their mockery into my masterpiece. The crystal chandelier above the Rutherford dining table caught the light from the candelabras, casting prismatic shadows across the faces of my family members. Each one wore the same expression of smug satisfaction they'd perfected over generations of wealth and privilege. I sat at my usual spot near the end of the table, the place reserved for family disappointments and plus ones who didn't quite measure up. So, Olivia, my stepbrother David began, swirling his wine with practiced arrogance. How's that little online consulting thing going? Still giving advice to housewives about their Etsy shops? The table erupted in polite titters. My sister-in-law Eleanor touched her pearl necklace, a gesture she made whenever she wanted to emphasize the difference between us. "It's so brave of you to pursue your passion," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Not everyone needs to be successful in the traditional sense." I took a measured sip of water, feeling the weight of the phone in my pocket. The message from my lawyer had arrived just minutes before dinner. "Transfer complete. Congratulations, Ms. Rutherford. Orion Capital now owns 51% of Rutherford Group Holdings." 5 years. It had been exactly 5 years since the night that changed everything. I remember standing in my father Philip's study, still wearing my best suit from what I thought would be a routine board meeting. The mahogany walls seemed to close in as he delivered his verdict. "You're too emotional for this business, Olivia," he'd said, not even looking up from his papers. "Your ideas about digital transformation and sustainable practices, they're not what Rutherford Group stands for. We've done things the same way for 80 years. "That's exactly the problem," I'd argued, my voice shaking with frustration. "The market is changing. Our competitors are adapting. If we don't evolve..." "Enough." He'd slammed his hand on the desk. "The board has made its decision. David will be taking over your responsibilities as Chief Marketing Officer. You can either accept a junior position in accounting or find opportunities elsewhere." The memory of that humiliation still burned. I'd built the marketing department from nothing, increased our market share by 30% in 3 years, and brought in partnerships that doubled our international presence. But none of that mattered when weighed against the cardinal sin of challenging the Rutherford way. "Earth to Olivia." David's voice cut through my thoughts. "Eleanor asked you a question. Though I suppose daydreaming is a luxury when you work from your apartment." I smiled, the kind of smile I'd perfected during long nights of planning. "Actually, I was just thinking about acquisitions." "Acquisitions?" My cousin Marcus laughed, nearly choking on his foie gras. "What are you acquiring? A new laptop?" The room filled with laughter again. My father, sitting at the head of the table like a king surveying his court, finally deigned to acknowledge my presence. "Perhaps it's time we discussed your future more seriously. Olivia, you're 32 now. This independence experiment has run its course." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I've spoken with Harold Whitman in our Cincinnati branch. There's an entry-level position in data entry. The salary isn't much, but it would give you stability, health insurance, a real job." I stared at the envelope he slid across the table. Data entry, in Cincinnati. After I'd generated over $50 million in revenue for the company before my exile. "That's very generous, Father," I said, not touching the envelope. "But I'm quite happy with my current position." "Your current position?" Eleanor's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Olivia, dear, we've all seen your LinkedIn. Independent business consultant isn't a position. It's what people put when they're unemployed." If only they knew. If only they could see the office hidden behind the shell company registrations. The team of 40 analysts and traders who called me CEO. The war room where we'd mapped out every weakness in Rutherford Group's corporate structure, every complacent board member, every shareholder who'd grown tired of stagnant returns. It had started small. In my studio apartment on the Lower East Side, I'd sold my Rutherford stock at a loss just to pay rent. using the proceeds to register Orion Capital as an LLC. My first hire was James Morrison, a brilliant analyst who'd been blackballed from Wall Street for refusing to massage numbers. Together, we'd identified undervalued companies in Rutherford's supply chain. The first acquisition was almost accidental. A small logistics firm that Rutherford Group had been squeezing for decades was about to go under. I bought it for pennies on the dollar, restructured their operations, and suddenly they were profitable. More importantly, they gave me insight into Rutherford's shipping schedules, inventory management, and the dangerous inefficiencies my family refused to address. One company became 3. 3 became 10. Within 2 years, Orion Capital controlled key pieces of infrastructure that Rutherford Group depended on but had grown too arrogant to notice. We were the invisible hand adjusting their supply costs, influencing their distribution networks, gathering intelligence on every weakness. "You know what I find fascinating," I said, interrupting another round of mockery about my wardrobe choices. "How confident everyone seems about the company's future." David straightened in his chair. "Why wouldn't we be? Rutherford Group posted record profits last quarter." "Record profits with record debt," I corrected. "Your expansion into Southeast Asia is hemorrhaging money. The factories in Michigan are operating at 40% capacity, and that's not even mentioning the shareholder lawsuit about fiduciary negligence." The table went silent. Eleanor's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. "How could you possibly know about?" David started, then caught himself. My father's eyes narrowed. "Have you been speaking to someone inside the company? Corporate espionage is a serious crime." "Olivia?" "It's not espionage when it's public record," I said, pulling out my phone. "Everything I just mentioned is in your SEC filings, though I doubt anyone at this table has read them. Too busy counting on the Rutherford name to carry you through." "Enough," my father growled. "I won't have you spreading lies about the company you abandoned." "I didn't abandon anything. I was forced out for having the audacity to suggest we adapt to the 21st century. I stood up, my heart pounding but my hands steady. "But you're right about one thing. This discussion about my future is overdue." I opened my phone and pulled up the document my lawyer had sent. The screen light illuminated my face as I held it up for everyone to see. As of 6:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today, Orion Capital completed its acquisition of controlling interest in Rutherford Group Holdings. 51% of voting shares, to be exact. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the distant hum of the wine refrigerator in the butler's pantry. "That's impossible," David whispered. "Impossible." I pulled up the Bloomberg Terminal app, showing the after-hours filing. Rutherford Group's stock has been underperforming for 3 years. Institutional investors have been looking for an exit. All it took was offering them a 20% premium over market price. "You don't have that kind of money," Eleanor said, her voice shrill. "This is some kind of trick." "Orion Capital manages assets worth $3.2 billion, I said, watching the blood drain from their faces. "We've been quite successful. Turns out, all those housewives with Etsy shops I consulted for included several tech founders looking to diversify their portfolios." My father stood slowly, his face purple with rage. "You think you can waltz in here and steal what our family built? I'll fight this in court. You'll do nothing," I interrupted. "Because if you do, I'll release the forensic audit my team completed last month. Did you know David has been siphoning money from the employee pension fund to cover his gambling debts? Or that Eleanor's art charity is actually a money laundering front for her father's connections in Eastern Europe?" Eleanor's wine glass shattered on the floor. "That's slander," David sputtered. "It's evidence," I corrected. "All documented, all verified, all ready to be handed to the FBI if anyone in this room even thinks about challenging my ownership." I'd spent 3 years gathering that evidence. Every suspicious transaction, every offshore account, every bribe disguised as a consulting fee. The Rutherford empire wasn't just stagnant, it was rotten to the core. "What do you want?" my father asked, his voice suddenly old and tired. "What I've always wanted," I said. to drag this company into the future, with or without your blessing. There's a board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. I'll be presenting my restructuring plan. Anyone who wants to remain employed would do well to attend. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and David. You might want to update your LinkedIn. Former COO has a nice ring to it. The walk from the dining room to the front door felt both endless and too quick. I could hear the explosion of voices behind me, accusations flying, glass breaking, the sound of an empire crumbling. Our family's driver, Thomas, stood by the door with my coat. "Congratulations, Ms. Olivia," he said quietly, helping me into it. "Some of us never forgot what you did for the staff." I smiled, remembering the employee advocacy programs I'd started, the fair wage initiatives my father had gutted the moment I left. "Thank you, Thomas. I hope you'll consider staying on." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, ma'am." The cold December air hit my face as I stepped outside. My town car was waiting, but I waved it off. I needed to walk, to feel the ground solid beneath my feet after what felt like years of balancing on a tightrope. My phone buzzed with messages from my team. "James, saw the filing go through. Champagne is on ice." Sarah from legal. "All contracts verified and bulletproof." Marcus from operations. "Building security has been notified about Monday's changes." 5 years of 18-hour days. 5 years of sleeping in the office, of eating takeout over spreadsheets, of building relationships with every competitor Rutherford had alienated. 5 years of watching my family's social media posts about their vacations and charity galas while I worked myself into the ground. But also, 5 years of freedom. 5 years of making decisions based on data, not tradition. 5 years of hiring the best people regardless of their last names or connections. 5 years of building something that was truly mine. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes Manhattan winters almost bearable. I stood outside the Rutherford building on Madison Avenue, looking up at the Art Deco facade I'd once known so well. The last time I'd walked through these doors, security had escorted me out with a box of personal items while my colleagues averted their eyes. This time, I walked in alone, wearing the same simple black suit I'd worn to every major negotiation. No jewelry except my grandmother's watch, the one piece of Rutherford heritage that had always truly belonged to me. The lobby fell silent as I entered. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, started to ask for my identification before an older guard touched her shoulder. "That's Ms. Rutherford," he said quietly, "the new CEO." The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to a different world. Each floor that passed represented another layer of the company's hierarchy, another level of the fortress I'd once been banished from. The executive conference room was already full when I arrived. The board of directors sat in their usual seats, faces ranging from curious to hostile. David was there, despite no longer having an official position, flanked by the family lawyer. Eleanor sat beside him, her designer suit unable to hide the dark circles under her eyes. My father held court at the head of the table, as if the past 72 hours hadn't happened. "This is still my seat," he said as I approached. "Was," I corrected, standing beside the chair. "Thomas, would you please escort Mr. Rutherford to the observer section?" My new head of security, promoted from the night shift my father had never bothered to learn existed, stepped forward. "Sir, if you would." The power struggle lasted exactly 3 seconds. My father looked around the room, saw no support in the faces of board members who'd already read my restructuring proposal, and stood. "This isn't over," he muttered as he passed. "You're right," I agreed, taking my seat. "It's just beginning." I opened my laptop and connected it to the presentation system. The first slide appeared on the screen, Rutherford Group Restructuring for the Next Century. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "what I'm about to show you may be disturbing. It's a comprehensive analysis of how this company has been managed for the past 5 years. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty." The next slide showed a graph that made several board members gasp. Revenue flat, costs spiraling, market share evaporating. This is what happens when nepotism trumps competence. I continued. When tradition becomes stagnation, when a company stops innovating and starts cannibalizing itself. I clicked through slide after slide of damning evidence. Factories operating at massive losses, contracts that hadn't been renegotiated in decades, competitors eating our lunch in every major market. The good news, I said, is that everything broken can be fixed, but it requires radical change, starting today. The restructuring plan was comprehensive. Automation for the factories, renegotiation of every supplier contract, investment in sustainable technologies that would cut costs and open new markets, and most importantly, a complete overhaul of leadership. Effective immediately. The following positions are eliminated: Chief Operating Officer, Chief Marketing Officer, and Executive Vice President of Sales. These roles will be replaced by a single Chief Innovation Officer recruited from outside the Rutherford gene pool. David stood up. You can't do this. We have contracts, golden parachutes, which were voided the moment I discovered embezzlement, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Your signature is on every fraudulent transfer. You can leave quietly with a standard severance package, or you can leave in handcuffs. Your choice. The color drained from his face as he opened the folder. Page after page of evidence, meticulously documented. His hands shook as he saw account numbers, dates, amounts. How long have you known? He whispered. 2 years, I admitted. I was hoping you'd come clean on your own. Consider the delay my last gift to whatever sibling bond we might have had. Eleanor tried a different approach. Olivia, please. We're family. Surely we can work something out. I could be useful to you. I know where all the bodies are buried. So do I said, pulling out another folder. Art fraud is a federal crime. Eleanor. The FBI takes a dim view of using charity auctions to launder money. She sank back in her chair, defeated. The rest of the meeting proceeded with military efficiency. Board members who'd initially planned to resist found themselves swayed by the numbers. The company was weeks away from a credit downgrade. My plan was the only thing standing between them and bankruptcy. I need unanimous approval to proceed, I said as the presentation concluded. Anyone who votes against will be bought out at current market price, not the premium Orion paid. Given that the stock is down 40% from its high, I imagine that would be painful. One by one, hands raised around the table. Even the family loyalists couldn't argue with math. Motion carried, I announced. Thank you for your support. Now, let's talk about who stays and who goes. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in corporate bloodletting. Decades of dead wood cleared out in an afternoon. Vice presidents who hadn't had an original idea since the Clinton administration. Middle managers whose only qualification was their golf handicap. An entire layer of bureaucracy that existed solely to protect itself. But I also identified the hidden talent, the junior executives whose proposals had been buried, the department heads who'd kept their divisions profitable despite corporate neglect, the assistants who knew more about the business than their bosses. Margaret Chen, I said, reading from my list. Currently buried in logistics as a coordinator, graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, speaks 4 languages. Single-handedly saved us $3 million last year by renegotiating shipping contracts. Congratulations, you're our new VP of Operations. Around the room, similar promotions were announced. People who'd been invisible to the Rutherford elite suddenly found themselves in positions of real authority. This is insane, David muttered. You're destroying everything. I'm saving it, I corrected. The company you helped drive into the ground, the legacy you treated like a personal piggy bank, the employees you viewed as expendable. I turned to address the room. Rutherford Group has coasted on its reputation for too long. That ends now. We're going to work harder, smarter, and more ethically than ever before. Anyone who can't handle that is free to leave. My father, who'd been silent throughout the bloodbath, finally spoke. And what about me? Are you going to humiliate me completely? I studied him for a long moment. The man who'd chosen tradition over his own daughter, who'd valued his son's gender over my proven competence, who'd built his identity on a foundation of inherited privilege. "You'll retain the title of Chairman Emeritus," I said finally. "A ceremonial position with no voting rights and no salary. You can keep your office and your parking space, show up for ribbon cuttings and retirement parties, but your days of running this company are over." "That's generous," he said bitterly, considering. "It's practical," I replied. "A sudden departure would spook investors. This way, we maintain continuity while implementing real change." The meeting adjourned with shell-shocked faces filing out. David and Eleanor left without a word, already calculating what they could salvage from their shattered empires. Board members huddled in corners, recalibrating their alliances. I remained in the conference room, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The city stretched endlessly below, a testament to ambition and reinvention. Everything could be torn down and rebuilt stronger. James knocked and entered, followed by the core Orion team I'd assembled over the years. "How does it feel?" he asked, popping the champagne he'd promised. "Like the beginning," I admitted, accepting a glass. "We bought the company. Now we have to save it." "The stock's up 12% in after-hours trading," Sarah reported. "The market likes what you're selling." "They like the idea of change," I corrected. "Now we have to deliver." We spent the rest of the day in that conference room, mapping out the transformation. Every department would be audited, every process re-engineered, every assumption challenged. By sunset, the building had taken on a different energy. Word of the changes had spread. Employees who'd given up hope were suddenly energized. Resumes were being updated, but not for escape for internal positions that suddenly seemed possible. I made one last stop before leaving. My old office, the one I'd been locked out of 5 years ago, was exactly as I'd left it. David had been too proud to use it, preferring the larger corner suite. My awards still hung on the wall. The photo of my team from our record-breaking campaign still sat on the bookshelf. But there was one addition, a resignation letter, dated 5 years ago, framed on the desk. Someone had thought my humiliation was worth commemorating. I picked up the frame and read my own words. "I respectfully decline the demotion to junior accountant. Effective immediately. I am resigning from Rutherford Group to pursue other opportunities." Other opportunities. If only I'd known what that phrase would come to mean. I took the frame with me, but not as a trophy. As a reminder, every empire could fall. Every leader could become complacent. Every victory could become tomorrow's cautionary tale. The weeks that followed were a blur of 16-hour days and brutal decisions. The company purge continued as we discovered more rot beneath the surface. A purchasing manager who'd been taking kickbacks for 20 years, an entire division that existed only on paper, siphoning funds into offshore accounts. But for every termination, there was a resurrection. The woman who'd been passed over for promotion 17 times because she didn't golf with the boys. The man whose innovative proposals had been credited to his incompetent supervisor. The team whose cost-cutting measures had been ignored because they threatened executive bonuses. The old guard tried to fight back. Of course, lawsuits were filed and dismissed. Whisper campaigns started and failed. A particularly nasty attempt to plant a scandal about my personal life fell apart when the investigator they hired turned out to be one of my Orion associates. "They're getting desperate," James warned during one of our morning briefings. "David's been meeting with competitors, trying to organize a hostile takeover." "Let him," I said, reviewing the latest financial reports. "Every move he makes just creates more evidence for the FBI investigation." The investigation had been my insurance policy, held in reserve until David forced my hand. Within days of his first approach to competitors, federal agents were crawling through his records. Eleanor had already fled to Switzerland, hoping her father's connections could protect her from extradition. My father, surprisingly, had adapted to his diminished role with something approaching grace. He showed up for his ceremonial duties, smiled for the cameras, and occasionally offered advice that wasn't completely outdated. "You're better at this than I was," he admitted one evening, finding me still in the office at midnight. I couldn't see past my own ego. You could have, I replied, not looking up from my laptop. You chose not to. He stood there for a moment, perhaps hoping for absolution I wasn't ready to give. Then he left, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The transformation took 6 months. 6 months of ruthless efficiency, strategic brilliance, and the kind of leadership I'd been prevented from providing years earlier. The stock price doubled. Employee satisfaction scores went from abysmal to industry-leading. Competitors who'd been circling like vultures found themselves fighting for survival against a revitalized Rutherford group. The final board meeting of the fiscal year was a victory lap disguised as a financial review. The directors who'd reluctantly supported my takeover now competed to praise the turnaround. Revenue up 30%, costs down 20%, market share recovered and growing. I believe some congratulations are in order, said Harrison Wells, the lead independent director. Ms. Rutherford has delivered on every promise and then some. The credit belongs to the team, I said, meaning it. Turns out there was tremendous talent here all along. It just needed to be unleashed. Still, he persisted, your leadership has been transformative. I think I speak for the board when I say we're grateful you didn't give up on the company. I thought about correcting him. I had given up on the company, at least the version that had rejected me. What I'd never given up on was the potential for something better. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval for the strategic plan going forward. Expansion into renewable energy, partnerships with tech companies, a complete reimagining of what a century-old industrial conglomerate could become. As the boardroom emptied, I found myself alone again, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed with congratulations from the Orion team, dinner invitations from executives who'd once ignored me, interview requests from business journalists eager to tell the comeback story of the year. I ignored them all, savoring the silence. There's a moment in every revenge story where the protagonist stands triumphant over their enemies, where the wrongs have been righted and the karmic scales balanced. Most stories end there, freeze-framed on the moment of victory. But real life keeps moving. Tomorrow there would be new challenges. Competitors adapting to our resurgence. Markets shifting in unpredictable ways. The constant pressure to prove that success wasn't a fluke. David was awaiting trial. His assets frozen, his reputation destroyed. Eleanor remained in exile. Her Instagram posts from Swiss ski resorts, a transparent attempt to maintain appearances. The extended family members who delighted in my humiliation now sent carefully worded emails about potential opportunities. I could have destroyed them all completely. Could have pursued every vendetta to its absolute conclusion. Could have salted the earth so thoroughly that the Rutherford name became synonymous with failure. Instead, I'd chosen construction over destruction, built something better on the foundation of what they'd nearly ruined, proved that competence trumped connections, that merit mattered more than birthright, that a company could be both profitable and principled. My assistant knocked and entered. Ms. Rutherford, your car is here. I nodded, gathering my things. Tomorrow would bring new battles. But tonight I had dinner reservations at a quiet restaurant where no one would recognize me, where I could eat without performing, exist without explaining, celebrate without ceremony. Thank you, Patricia, I said, heading for the door. Have a good evening. Ms. Rutherford, she called as I reached the elevator. I just wanted to say, my daughter just graduated from business school. She's been following your story. You've given her hope that talent matters more than connections. I smiled, remembering my own graduation, full of hope before the world taught me otherwise. Tell her the path isn't easy, but it's worth it. The elevator descended smoothly, carrying me from the executive heights to the street level. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its usual energy. Taxis honked, pedestrians rushed, the city indifferent to corporate dramas and personal victories. I slid into the back of the town car, giving the driver the restaurant address. As we pulled away from the building, I caught a glimpse of the Rutherford logo illuminated against the night sky. For 80 years, it had represented tradition, stability, the unshakable power of inherited wealth. Now it meant something different. Innovation, accountability. The radical idea that a company should be run by its best people, not its best connected ones. My phone buzzed with another message. This time, I looked. It was from a former colleague, someone who'd watched my expulsion in silence 5 years ago. Saw the quarterly report. You did it. You actually did it. I typed back a simple response. We did it, and we're just getting started. The car merged into traffic, carrying me away from the battlefield where I'd won my war. Behind me, the Rutherford building stood tall, no longer a monument to my family's arrogance, but a symbol of what determination could accomplish. They'd called me a failure, said I was too emotional, too radical, too unwilling to accept the natural order of things. They'd laughed at my attempts to earn my place at a table I'd been born to sit at. Now I owned the table, and the room, and the building it sat in. But the real victory wasn't in the acquisition or the revenge. It was in the hundreds of employees who now had hope for advancement, the shareholders who finally saw returns on their investment, the customers who received better products at fair prices. It was in proving that nepotism was a luxury businesses couldn't afford. That tradition without innovation was just stagnation with better PR. That sometimes the best person for the job was the one the establishment had rejected. The driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Good day, Miss Rutherford. I considered the question. The hostile takeover. The family showdown. The corporate bloodbath. The federal investigations. The complete restructuring of a century-old company. You know what, I said, surprising myself with a genuine laugh. It really was. The city lights blurred past as we drove through the night. Somewhere in those lights, David was consulting with lawyers he could no longer afford. Eleanor was learning that Swiss extradition treaties weren't as ironclad as she'd hoped. My father was perhaps finally understanding that respect was earned, not inherited. And somewhere else in those lights, a young woman fresh out of business school was updating her resume, dreaming of possibilities that hadn't existed 6 months ago. A middle manager was preparing a proposal that might actually be heard. An innovative idea was being dusted off and reconsidered. That was the real revenge. Not just taking over the empire that had rejected me, but transforming it into something worth inheriting. Not just proving them wrong, but proving that their way was wrong. The restaurant appeared ahead, its discreet entrance a welcome respite from the chaos of the day. I had no +1, no entourage, no need to impress anyone. Just a quiet table, good wine, and the satisfaction of a job well done. As I stepped out of the car, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Olivia Rutherford, I answered. Ms. Rutherford, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Wall Street Journal. I'm writing a feature on the most dramatic corporate turnarounds of the year. I was hoping. Send your questions to my communications director. I interrupted politely. If we decide to participate, someone will be in touch. But this is your story, she pressed. Don't you want to tell your side? I paused at the restaurant door, considering my side, as if there were multiple versions of the truth, as if the numbers didn't speak for themselves, as if success needed narration. Ms. Walsh, I said finally, the only side that matters is the company's. Revenue is up, employees are thriving, shareholders are happy. That's the story. I ended the call and handed my phone to the hostess along with my coat. Tonight, I would eat my dinner in peace. Tomorrow, I would return to the battle. Next year, there would be new challenges and new victories. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to sit alone at a quiet table and raise a glass to the woman who'd refused to accept their definition of failure, who'd built an empire in the shadows while they celebrated in the light, who'd bought not just a company, but the power to redefine what success looked like. They could keep calling me a failure if it made them feel better. When you own the dictionary, you get to write the definitions.